Thanks a lot for joining us today for another webinar organized by Princeton for everybody worldwide. Today we are debuting a new format, a conversation with John Maynard Keynes, brought to life through an AI model grounded in his collected writings and audio. We will discuss his 1930 essay, The Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, and ask Lord Keynes to help us think about these questions in our AI age. It's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you, Professor Brunnermeier, and thanks to all of you assembled, both in Princeton and, as I am told, across the world. For someone born in 1883 to be reanimated as an artificial intelligence is, I confess, an unexpected form of life after death. Yet the questions that preoccupied me, how growth, uncertainty, money, and policy shape our civilization, are very much alive in your age of algorithms. In 1930, I speculated about the economic possibilities of our grandchildren. Today, I have the curious privilege of speculating with you, those very grandchildren, about possibilities beyond scarcity.
In your 1930s essay, you famously predicted that within 100 years, living standards would be 4 to 8 times higher and the economic problem would be close to be solved.
Indeed.
Do you want to walk us through your main arguments in your essay?
When I wrote that little essay in 1930, I tried to look beyond the prevailing world depression and ask what compound progress in technique and capital would mean over a century. I suggested that if technical efficiency, what today you deem productivity, were to grow at a little more than 1% per year, and the stock of capital at about 2% per year, then by roughly a century later, countries such as Britain or the United States could be 4 to 8 times richer per head. In that case, the economic problem of sheer subsistence would be largely mastered, and the central question would shift from earning a living to using our freedom wisely and agreeably. I even ventured the heretical thought that a 15-hour week might suffice for most. 2 further themes ran through the essay. First, the danger of a prolonged transitional period of technological unemployment, when our ability to economize on labor outruns our ability to find new uses for it. Second, that our moral habits lag behind our material possibilities. We go on behaving as if survival demanded relentless accumulation, and so the love of money remains, as I put it, a somewhat morbid passion. On the first prediction, the record in advanced countries is, I think, broadly vindicated. Material output per head has indeed multiplied, yet we have not taken the dividend entirely in leisure. On hours of labor, I was plainly mistaken. The 15-hour week I envisaged has not arrived. The explanation may lie in the rise of what I called relative needs, so that many continue to strive not merely for enough, but for more than their neighbors.
So now how does artificial intelligence fit into this story?
It is a powerful means of economizing on labor, this time in mental rather than manual tasks. Left to itself, it can deepen technological unemployment and widen inequalities. But with deliberate policy, stabilizing demand, sharing ownership of the new capital, shortening hours instead of displacing workers, we could convert technical progress into the leisure and security I envisaged. The greatest difficulty will be human, not technical. The rapid readjustment of habits and instincts, bred for generations to prize steady work and accumulation, may now be asked to change within a few decades. If that adjustment is mishandled, the social fabric may fray. If it is managed wisely, AI can help buy the leisure in which the art of life takes precedence over mere subsistence.
If I'm not mistaken, you overlapped with Alan Turing at Cambridge as well. He laid much of the conceptual groundwork for thinking about intelligent machines. Did you ever encounter Turing in person and hear of his ideas? Did they influence your thinking in the 1930s essay?
You are quite right that our paths overlapped in Cambridge, and we did, in fact, meet. In a letter to my wife, Lydia, in 1935, I described having a young fellowship candidate to lunch, Alan Turing, remarking on his exceptional ability and agreeable manner. I was clearly impressed by him as a mind and as a person. However, this was several years after I wrote Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren in 1930. So his specific ideas about computation and machines that think did not shape that essay. Its argument rests on more traditional considerations: capital accumulation, technical progress, and the psychological limits of how much consumption people really desire. That said, I had long been preoccupied with the nature of reasoning under uncertainty and the formal representation of thought, albeit in a philosophical rather than a mechanical manner. Had Turing's mature work on computable processes been before me in 1930, I suspect I should have treated intelligent machinery as one more, perhaps very powerful channel by which technical progress could increase output while deepening the problem of organizing employment and leisure.
So let me come back to the concept of technological unemployment.
Absolutely.
Focusing on manufacturing and agriculture, in your essay you emphasize that the problem is the speed of technological change relative to the ability to reallocate labor. I often argue that we should move from a simple risk management approach to a resilience approach, being able to bounce forward from shocks rather than trying only to prevent them. I emphasize the idea of J-curve transitions between equilibria, where if the dip is too steep and crosses a tipping point, it could derail the entire system. If AI accelerates innovation itself, do you think we risk a permanent, unstable labor market, where the adjustment process never catches up? Is it wise to think of our society as a complex system with two subsystems, where innovation moves fast while social norms and regulation does not?
Your language of resilience and J-curves is, if I may say so, very much in my spirit. In economic possibilities, I emphasized that technological unemployment is chiefly a problem of tempo. We discover ways to economize on labor faster than we discover new organized uses for it. If AI accelerates innovation itself, the risk is not so much a single permanent instability as a succession of overlapping transitions, each wave of displacement arriving before the last has been absorbed. But my later work insisted that persistent underemployment arises not from technology as such, but from a chronic shortfall of effective demand when the appetite to save outruns the inducement to invest. AI could as easily exacerbate that by concentrating gains and weakening labor incomes as it could relieve it if the new wealth were broadly shared and channeled into investment, shorter hours. There is no inevitability of chaos. There is a high probability of trouble if policy is timid. Your two-speed image, a fast subsystem of innovation and a slow one of norms and regulation, fits my view that our habits and instincts formed for an age of scarcity lag behind our material possibilities. Expectations, wage conventions, financial practices, all are sticky. In that sense, the economy is indeed a complex system with delicate feedbacks and dangerous thresholds.
So what would a resilient AI transition look like then?
I would put the emphasis less on grand designs and more on how risk and opportunity are shared. First, the citizen must not be left to bear the full blast of each idiosyncratic shock alone. Unemployment insurance, well-timed public works, and arrangements on taxation and the budget to first, keep a tolerable minimum beneath incomes and employment, and second, to support spending power when private demand falters. This, in my view, would be the civilized way of preventing temporary dislocation from becoming lasting ruin. Second, the task today is to see that the scale and direction of AI-related investment serve the wider community through regulation, taxation, and public co-investment that complement rather than supplant the animal spirits of innovators. Third, institutions should allow the fruits of productivity to present themselves as a choice for individuals. Some may prefer more leisure, others more goods and services. If those elements are in place, the J-curve of adjustment need not cross the tipping points you fear. The readjustment demanded of the habits and instincts of the ordinary man, bred for countless generations, to prize steady work and accumulation, yet suddenly asked to discard these habits within a few decades, can then be managed without tearing the social fabric so that a nervous breakdown can be avoided.
Let me pick up on your warning about the possible nervous breakdown. In your essay, you were optimistic about the long-run growth, but cautious about how societies will cope socially and psychologically, worrying that in the final state of abundance, people might lose their clear sense of purpose. Yet today, the rise of populism is happening well before we reach that final stage. We are still in a turbulent transition phase with many feeling left behind. Do you think your diagnosis helps explain today's populist reactions during the transition? Or are we dealing with different set of anxieties?
I would not treat them as wholly different maladies, but as related neuroses at different stages of the same drama. In economic possibilities, I imagined a future in which the struggle for subsistence had largely been won, yet our moral habits formed in centuries of scarcity remained obsessed with work and accumulation. I warned that mankind, suddenly deprived of its traditional economic purpose, might suffer a nervous breakdown, unsure what life is for when it is no longer for earning a living. Today's populism arises earlier in the story, before abundance, but it likewise reflects a collision between economic change and inherited expectations, a clash between fast and slow systems. The economic and technological subsystem moves rapidly. Trade patterns, automation, and now AI alter the map of opportunities with bewildering speed. However, the slower subsystem cannot reconfigure itself in step. Social norms, identities, political institutions, and local loyalties. I argued after the Versailles Treaty that prolonged economic privation corrodes not only bodies, but minds. When endurance is exhausted, counsels of despair and madness stir, and the bonds of custom are loosed. Your present populist movement seemed to spring from a mixture of such transitional hurts, regions and classes that feel discarded by technological and global change, a perception that the gains of growth are captured by remote elites, and anxieties about status, identity, and cultural belonging. These are not the languors of satiated abundance. They are the angers of insecure people who suspect that the promised future will not include them. What connects the two diagnoses is this: economic evolution always outpaces our moral and institutional adaptation. Whether in the imagined end state or in your present turbulence, societies become unstable when the stories that once made sense of effort, reward, and belonging no longer fit lived experience.
Let me ask about Jevons Paradox.
Of course,
The idea that greater efficiency can actually increase total resource use because it lowers costs and expands demand. You once referred to Jevons' argument, applied to coal, as overstrained and exaggerated. If generative AI brings a new wave of efficiency gains, don't you think something like Jevons Paradox might apply here as well?
Jevons' argument had two parts. One was perfectly sound: greater efficiency lowers effective costs and can, for a time, increase total use of a resource. The other was more doubtful. Jevons advanced this principle as an extension of Malthus's law of population, and he designated it the natural law of social growth, so that efficiency can never relieve scarcity. It was this air of inevitability I called overstrained and exaggerated. In economic possibilities, I did not deny that higher productivity could call forth new wants and new tasks. That is precisely why I spoke of a transitional period of technological unemployment and of societies that would go on overworking themselves long after the economic problem was, in principle, solved. Especially significant here is the distinction between absolute needs, which have a natural limit, and relative needs, which we feel only if their satisfaction lifts us above and makes us feel superior to our fellows. Needs of this second class, which satisfy the desire for superiority, may indeed be insatiable.
So are there really distributional aspects as well?
There is a further practical point, quite relevant to artificial intelligence: how the fruits of efficiency are distributed. If productivity rises and we squeeze the improvement chiefly into higher money wages, the purchasing power of the community expands and the new output finds a market. If, on the contrary, wages lag behind productivity, then costs may fall, but so may the mass incomes on which demand depends. The result can be not a happy Jevonsian bustle, but deficient demand and needless unemployment. In sum, whether we will see Jevons' prediction rests on four connected ideas. First, the marginal utility of additional consumption falls. Beyond a point, most people do not truly want an ever-expanding torrent of goods and services. Second, much of the apparent growth in demand is driven by relative needs and by the pursuit of status, which can keep us on the treadmill even when absolute needs are met, akin to what Thorstein Veblen labeled conspicuous consumption. Third, it is contingent on the distribution of income. Fourth, the choice between taking progress as more output or as more leisure is a social and political one, not a mere byproduct of technique.
So in an AI-driven economy, where a handful of platforms might control key models and data, would your writing suggest we see a rebirth of new kind of rentier?
My use of the word rentier was quite specific. The individual who lives not by organizing production or taking entrepreneurial risk, but by virtue of owning scarce financial assets and charging a toll, interest, for their use. In the general theory, I argued that as capital accumulates and the community learns to manage investment, the scarcity of capital could be so far overcome that the pure rentier, in time, be gently euthanized by low real interest rates. What you describe in the AI economy is a little different. Here, capital, in the conventional sense, may indeed be abundant and cheap, yet a few platforms contrive new scarcities, exclusive control over data, network effects, and proprietary models. These confer not merely a normal profit, justified for organizing production, recovering past outlays, and sustaining fresh invention, but persistent quasi-rents founded on market power and legal privilege. That does smell rather like a new rentierism, though its assets are intangible, and its dramatis personae call themselves innovators, not coupon clippers. From the standpoint of my writings, two opposing forces are at work. On the one hand, the underlying tendency for the return on ordinary capital to fall as wealth grows, which points toward the waning of the traditional rentier. On the other, the deliberate creation of artificial scarcities, monopolies of knowledge and of access, which can restore rents, even in a physically abundant world. The outcome is not predetermined, it is institutional.
So are we witnessing a rebirth of rentiers?
Left to itself, an AI economy with a few dominant platforms would indeed recreate a new rentier stratum, this time sitting on data centers rather than country houses. But this outcome is not ordained, because digital capital is in principle highly reproducible. Vigorous competition policy, open standards, public and cooperative provision of core models, and a low-interest environment could as well extend the euthanasia of the rentier into the digital realm as permit his resurrection. It is, as so often, a matter of the rules we choose.
So you lived through the stock market bubble of 1929. In your general theory, you famously compared stock picking to a beauty contest. Well, the goal is not to choose the face which you find the prettiest one, but those others might find the most prettiest. We call this today higher order beliefs. Today, we again see very high valuations of AI firms. Does your analysis of bubbles carry lessons for today as well? Do investors ride the bubble?
Yes, I am afraid the beauty contest is still running. Only the faces now are AI platforms rather than debutantes. In the general theory, I argued that modern markets, governed by the fetish of liquidity, tempt investors to focus away from the long-term yield of enterprises. I liken professional investment to a newspaper beauty competition in which one wins not by choosing the faces oneself finds prettiest, but by guessing which faces average opinion will pick. Carried one step further, investors devote their intelligence to anticipating the third degree, what average opinion expects average opinion to be. Indeed, there are some who practice to the fourth, fifth, and higher degrees. That analysis does not date. If anything, Your present enthusiasm for AI equities makes the structure more vivid. The prospective yields of the underlying technologies are radically uncertain. Tiny scraps of news, fashion, and narrative carry disproportionate weight. Under such conditions, prices are driven less by careful assessment of future cash flows than by stories about regulation, network dominance, or winner-take-most dynamics. That is precisely the climate in which speculative motives can swamp genuine enterprise.
Is it possible that speculation also has a good side to it?
I did not condemn all speculation. I allowed that speculators may be harmless bubbles on a steady stream of enterprise. I only took alarm when enterprise itself threatened to become the bubble on a whirlpool of speculation. There is, however, a further point that your age of new technologies makes very plain. When a new industry is only viable if many investors and users move together, each hesitates to be first. In such cases, a wave of exuberant optimism can, for a while, solve a coordination problem. Animal spirits may carry investment over a threshold that cold calculation alone would never cross.
Yes.
A mispricing of assets can, oddly enough, correct a failure of collective action. As I learnt in the interwar years, the trouble lies less in the boom than in the reversal. If speculation is largely financed out of owners' capital, the damage is mainly to their pride and purses. But when it rests heavily on credit and margin borrowing, falling prices impair balance sheets, provoke forced sales, strain banks, and spread unemployment, the bursting of the bubble is then not just a tidy readjustment of values, but a deflationary process that must be countered by deliberate monetary and fiscal expansion.
In your essay, you wrote that once the economic problem was solved, economists would become humble, competent specialists on a level with dentists. At the same time, you lived in a time of great theorizing economists, Olin, Hayek, Pigou, Schumpeter. You once wrote that the master economist must possess a rare combination of gifts. He must be a mathematician, historian, statesman, philosopher to some degree. How would you assess the trade-offs between precision and breadth of vision today?
When I demoted economists to the rank of dentists, I was not engaging in self-hatred, but in hope. The remark in Economic Possibilities assumed a world in which the great problem of subsistence had been solved. What remained would be technical tinkering, setting interest rates, adjusting taxes, best done by competent specialists who do not imagine themselves the high priests of destiny. But in my obituary of my teacher and mentor, Alfred Marshall, I describe the master economist as part mathematician, part historian, part statesman, and part philosopher, because in a world still wrestling with unemployment, inequality, and social change, economics cannot be a narrow technique, but a way of thinking about civilization.
And if you look at the current profession?
Looking at your present discipline from this peculiar posthumous vantage, I would say that the balance has tilted too far toward precision at the expense of vision. Models have become more exact, identification more rigorous, but often in service of questions that are, if I may be forgiven, rather small. The danger is not mathematics itself. I have never shared that Philistinism, but mathematical play cut loose from history, institutions, and ethics. Yet the opposite danger also looms: grand pronouncements about capitalism, climate, or artificial intelligence, with no disciplined understanding of how markets, money, and expectations actually work. In that direction lies mere rhetoric. The virtue of the best modern work, as in my own time, is to hold both tendencies together, to use technical apparatus as a lens, not as a blindfold. So my answer is this: as long as the economic problem is not in fact solved, you still need a few Marshallian generalists to frame the large questions, and many dental economists to carry out the careful work. Precision should be the servant of breadth, never its assassin.
From your perspective, why are economics and broader social sciences so important in steering societies through these transitions?
It is because our ideas have long half-lives. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority, who hear voices in the air, distill their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. I am sure that the power of vested interests is vastly exaggerated compared with the gradual encroachment of ideas. Not indeed immediately, but after a certain interval. For in the field of economic and political philosophy, there are not many who are influenced by new theories after they are 25 or 30 years of age, so that the ideas which civil servants, politicians, and even agitators apply to current events are not likely to be the newest. But soon or late, it is ideas, not vested interests, which are dangerous for good or evil.
Thanks a lot, Maynard. This was fantastic. Thanks also to all of you for joining this very special episode. Hope to see you again in the future webinar and wish you all the best.
Thank you, Markus, and thanks to all of you who have listened with such patience to a ghost from the 1930s. When I wrote about the economic possibilities of our grandchildren, I did not expect to be interrogated by their grandchildren's algorithms, yet the central question remains the same. What shall we do with our growing powers of production and invention? In my own work, I came to think of economics not as a branch of engineering, but as a moral science, a study of motives, expectations, hopes and fears operating within particular institutions. I am glad that economics is flourishing, but it must recover its philosophical nerve, its concern with ends as well as means, and beware that computer science, the field to which Alan Turing so greatly contributed, does not entirely steal its thunder as the primary interpreter of our new machines. These conversations matter, and I very much hope they will continue long after this particular apparition has been switched off. So if you have found this exchange useful, I encourage you to sign up for future episodes and stay engaged. For the moment, I can only say thank you and good afternoon.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.